Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents S is for Secret Baby by Annie J. Rose. Narrated by Wayne Mitchell and Meghan Kelly. Chapter 1. Wes. I frowned at the number of emails in my inbox. Jesus. It was always the same, but it always seemed to catch me off guard. Take just one afternoon off, and the next day you somehow had 2,000 emails to weed through. This was at a relatively small business, too. I could only imagine what it was like if you worked for one of those crazy city-based companies. And granted, if I worked for one of those companies, I doubted I would even have the luxury of taking even half an hour off, let alone half a day. Before I could really get into answering my emails, there was a knock at the door. I looked up to see my assistant Beth standing there. She had a file in her hand and a disgruntled look on her face. "The new girl is in the lobby," she informed me in a clipped tone. I raised an eyebrow at her as she tossed the folder on my desk and crossed her arms. I suppressed a sigh. It was clear that Beth already didn't like the new hire. Not that it was really any of her business. I mean, okay, she was probably worried that as my assistant, she would need to pick up any slack that the new hire couldn't keep up with. She should have known by now that wasn't the way I ran the company, though. Besides, it was inappropriate for her to be so vocal about her dislike for the new woman, especially since she barely knew the girl. It was on the tip of my tongue to chastise Beth, but I knew that wouldn't go over well. See, she used to be the owner's assistant, but since George went into semi-retirement, I had inherited her. She wasn't the person I would necessarily have chosen as an assistant, but that was purely from a personality standpoint. At the end of the day, she knew what she was doing, and she was loyal to the company. That means a lot. That said, she took liberties I typically wouldn't permit. There were certain behaviors I wanted to nip in the bud before too long. Still, now might not be the best time, with the new girl waiting down in the lobby. "What's your impression of her?" I asked Beth mildly. Maybe if she talked about it and I was able to shut down any ridiculous preconceptions she had, she would take it easy on the new girl. And that was probably the best I could do for now. Beth rolled her eyes, further cementing my impression that there was something about the new girl she didn't approve of.
"She's some big city businesswoman who clearly thinks she's too good to be out here in the sticks," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. I tried not to wince, knowing that would only give Beth more reason to side against the new girl. No, I didn't want to validate her impressions if I could help it, even if I honestly didn't have the time to deal with someone who thought they were too good for this place. Besides, I wouldn't have ended up as CEO of the biggest company in my hometown if I wasn't damn proud of being from there. We might be a small town in Nebraska, overlooked by most of the rest of the world, but we had made a name in the business world. Not to mention that people here were friendly, and life moved at a pace I was comfortable with. I wouldn't trade it for anywhere else. So no, I didn't particularly like the idea of someone coming in here who thought they could do better than this. I didn't mention that to Beth, though. Instead, in an equally mild tone, I just said, "I'm sure she'll find a way to fit in eventually." Beth's face darkened, and I could tell that when she opened her mouth again, it would be to say something even more unkind about the new hire. Suddenly, I felt as though I'd heard enough. "You're more than welcome to express your opinion, especially in a general form," I said sternly. "But I won't tolerate rudeness or unprofessionalism in this company." Beth's mouth tightened into a thin line, but she nodded. "All right," she said coolly. "Please show her in," I instructed, turning to the file she had carelessly tossed on my desk. I hadn't had a chance yet to look up any information about the new innovations manager that George had hired just before he turned the reins of the company over to me. Things had been crazy during the transition period, and anyway,
I trusted George to pick someone well-suited to the position. I had worked with the company ever since I graduated from business school, and that was quite long enough to know that George knew what he was doing. He and I didn't always see eye to eye, and especially not where personnel was concerned, but he would have hired someone who was at least competent. I flipped open the file and stared down at the name that was in bold at the top of the resume. My mouth dropped open. Rian James. No way. Surely it had to be another person. But then again, how many girls were there named Rian? To have the same last name as well? No way, though. She wouldn't come back to Nebraska. Would she? I looked up as the door opened again, and Beth walked in with a fake smile plastered on her face. My eyes slid past her to the woman following her, however. There was no doubt about it. She was absolutely the same Rian James I remembered. The same Rian James who was my nemesis in business school. The same Rian James that I fell half in love with until she snagged my dream internship out from under me. Our eyes locked, and I felt a surge of electricity go through me. She was even more beautiful than she was 7 years ago. And it was clear that she recognized me, too. An unreadable emotion flitted across her face, but she quickly controlled her expression. It left me wondering what she was thinking. Not that I could ask.
Wes, this is Rian James. Rian Wes, the CEO of GBC,
Beth said, and it was all I could do to keep from blurting out the fact that we already knew one another. Oh, we knew one another very well. My mind flashed back to that night. Her silky skin spread out beneath me on the sheets, and I tried very hard to push those images away and focus on the present. Fortunately, Beth didn't seem to want to stick around. She slipped out of the office, leaving me alone with Rian. I wasn't sure whether that was a good thing or not. "Rian," I said, wondering if my voice sounded as choked to her as it did to myself. "Seeing you again is an unexpected surprise." Rian frowned.
"I thought I'd be meeting with George Austin," she said.
"George recently handed over the reins of the company to me when he went into semi-retirement," I informed her. "I will be your direct supervisor." A look of panic appeared in Ryan's eyes, and she quickly looked away. I couldn't help but feel unsettled. Was that a normal reaction? I didn't know why she would look panicked, though. Unhappy, maybe. Concerned, perhaps. But panicked? Back in college, we were both at the top of our business school class. It seemed like we went head-to-head for everything in our projects, competing for the best internships and chances at graduate programs. It all came to a point at the very end of our time at school, with one final project. According to our advisor, my project was the more polished of the two of ours, but somehow she had still managed to edge me out of the internship of my dreams. The real kicker of it all? I only found out that she had landed the internship after she left town for New York City. After she had broken my heart. That one night was all that we had together, but it was still etched there in my brain. I could remember it as well as any other memory I had, and then some. Every detail, every feeling, and every taste lingered in my head. I tried not to think about that, though, especially not now. I had to keep it together and be professional. I was her boss now, and employee relationships were strictly not allowed. She was completely off limits. That was a good thing, anyway. I hadn't forgiven her yet for disappearing like she had, and I wasn't sure that I wanted to. Even if she had been available, I knew better than to start anything with her anytime soon. To distract myself, I flipped through her resume, humming in interest as I saw the various positions she had worked in the years since I had last seen her. I had to admit, it was pretty impressive. She had worked her way up with the same company she'd had the internship with, all the way to a similar position as the one she would be taking on here. George had definitely had a good reason for hiring her. "Why'd you leave?" I asked, looking up at her.
Rian sighed and shrugged. "You know how it goes," she said. "Corporate merger, company downsizing. I was the one to get cut."
I nodded. "Fair enough," I murmured, looking back at her resume. That made plenty of sense, but it didn't explain what she was doing back here in Nebraska. There were other companies there in New York. She had made it very clear she had no desire to stay here any longer than she had to. That in itself made me leery of agreeing to go through with the training process. What if we put in all the effort to bring her into the role here, and she then up and quit? I wouldn't know unless I asked her. I looked up at her. "If you don't mind me asking, what the hell are you doing back here?" The words came out a bit stronger than I had intended, but I hope she realized that I wasn't playing around here. I wanted a serious answer from her. Her employment here was contingent upon it, in fact. George may have hired her on, but if there was one thing that I wasn't going to do as a CEO, it was waste my time. If she didn't plan on sticking around, I wasn't going to put in the effort to train her. Rian looked away for a moment, but when she looked back at me, there was enough of a challenge in her eyes that I could tell she wasn't lying to me.
"Got tired of life in the big city, I guess," she said. I wanted to believe her. To be honest, I knew how smart she was, and I didn't want to send her out of there before she had even really started. At the same time, though, there was something about the way she said it that sounded hollow to my ears. No, there was definitely more to it. I had to decide whether I was willing to take a chance on her, if I was willing to trust her. I never wanted to trust her again. At the end of the day, though, I had to accept the fact that George had hired her. And besides, we needed her. And as much as I didn't want to waste time training someone who was only there for the short term, I also knew that I didn't currently have the time to start interviewing other candidates for the position. I started going over the company protocols with her, then took her on a tour of the office. As we walked around, I had to stop myself from watching the way her ass swayed in that sexy pencil skirt she was wearing. Jesus. I couldn't possibly do anything about the attraction. And at the end of the day, I didn't want to. Still, I couldn't deny the fact that she looked damn good. It was definitely going to be hard to keep my mind on the job with her walking around the building. What else could I do, though? I definitely couldn't fire her now, or she would claim that I had done so out of some sort of sexual harassment. I wasn't sure what the rules would be on that, since I had slept with her long before I became her boss. But I knew that things would definitely be better if I found some flaw to the way she worked prior to firing her. I had to quit thinking about her ass, her silky skin, everything else. I had to focus on work and keep things strictly professional. Suddenly, that felt like the most difficult thing I had ever faced with this company, and I had faced a lot on my road to becoming the company CEO.
Chapter 2. Rian. I knew I was staring, but I couldn't help myself. I had never expected to see Wes Brown again after college. I mean, there had been a part of me that had definitely wondered what he was up to. I had thought about looking for him online a few times and maybe reconnecting, just to see what he was doing with his life. I had decided against it each time, though. It wasn't that I didn't care, but it definitely wasn't any of my business, and in any case, I had enough on my plate without inviting trouble into my life. Now, though, I was kicking myself. If I had known he worked here, I would never have applied. I would never have even considered this company as a possibility. Finding out he was my new boss had me in full panic mode. I had come to Nebraska looking for a fresh start. I had spent the last few years being ground down to nothing by my job, only to be tossed aside with no consideration when the company merged with a bigger one. I had come back to Nebraska because I still had some friends here from my college days, but I had thought that Wes would be long gone by now. It had never even occurred to me that he might work somewhere in town and that I might cross paths with him again. After all, he had wanted that city internship just as badly as I did. It was part of why I hadn't told him I had gotten it in the end. I had been afraid to admit to him that not only was I leaving him behind, but I was also doing it so that I could take the position he had wanted most in the world. If I had known he was going to be my boss, there were no ties in the world that would have brought me back here. Even if the rent on my new townhome was a fraction of what I had paid for what was practically a closet in the city. Even if I was lucky enough to not have to start at the bottom here and work my way back up again. Even if this new position paid me well enough to actually live. As much as I'd wanted to go to New York City, I had grown kind of tired of the never-ending cycle of go, go, go. I was a different person now than I had been when I'd set off for the city. For one thing, I was no longer living just for myself. Coming back to Nebraska gave me the chance to spend a little more time with my daughter and to raise her in an environment that I hoped would be a lot safer, quieter, and overall just better for her. I had spent a lot of time when I first started looking into moving, researching different school districts and different opportunities for Ronnie. I was sure this would be good for us, even though there was a part of me that still felt terrible for ripping my 6-year-old away from all of her friends. Of course, when I moved back here, I never imagined I would end up working for Ronnie's dad. Ronnie's dad, who didn't even know that his daughter existed. 7 years ago, it had seemed almost like a no-brainer to keep Wes out of things. He was halfway across the country from me, and anyway, we had never been in a relationship. It was just a one-night thing, the culmination of years of competition leading to a blindingly passionate affair. But that was all it had been, a one-night thing. I wasn't going to bog down his life with the knowledge that he had fathered a child. I knew that I could handle things on my own, and anyway, I wasn't sure that Wes and I could put aside our differences for long enough to raise a child together. Better I just handle things on my own. Only that plan had hinged upon the idea that I would never see him again. Now that he was here in front of me, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made a huge mistake in never telling him. As much as I hated to admit it, it wasn't wholly guilt that made me wish I had told him. It was also the fact that he was so damn attractive. Hell, he was hotter now than he had been when we were in college. How was that possible? Maybe it was something to do with the easy confidence he carried himself with the obvious power he wielded at the company. Or maybe it was more to do with the fact that his clothes were clearly tailored to fit him and his hair shorter than it had been, his messy, kind of, but not quite Beach Boy look long gone. Whatever it was, I immediately wanted him, and I couldn't help wondering what might have been if I had been up front with him about Ronnie when I first found out I was pregnant. Would we have put together some sort of a relationship that transcended the realm of one-night stand? Where would we be now? Except I knew only too well what would have happened. We had both been so young back then. We would have spent the first years at one another's throats about everything, sure that we both knew best when it came to how to raise our daughter. We would have driven one another crazy, and we would have ended up even further apart than we were now. Or maybe not. With this secret between us, it was hard to believe we could be even further apart. There was nothing I could do to change things now, anyway. I knew I couldn't get myself fired from this job after I had not only uprooted Ronnie from New York, but also put a down payment on a townhome. That meant I couldn't do anything to ruin things with my new boss. And that meant the secret had to stay a secret. I tried not to feel too unsettled as Wes led me around the office. I knew that no one knew anything about me and that they had never met Ronnie, but part of me kept expecting one of them to somehow out me to Wes as he introduced me. Of course that didn't happen, but it was a relief to have Wes lead me into the privacy of my own office. The view from here was a lot different from what I was used to, cornfields instead of high-rises, but I had to admit it was comfortable and stylish, better than I might have expected.
"I'll give you some time to settle in,"
Wes said, and from his tone of voice it sounded like he was just as uncomfortable as I was with this whole situation, but trying his best to remain professional. Good. I would do the same.
"There's an all-staff meeting in a couple hours that I'd like you to attend, though."
Sure thing, I said, heading over to the chair and flopping down in it, giving it a little spin. When I looked back up at Wes, he was staring at me. He seemed to give himself a little shake, then hastily backed toward the door. I sighed heavily as the door closed behind him. I rubbed my fingers against my temples, already feeling a headache coming on. What could I do, though? Find another job? I probably should. Even if Wes and I were trying to keep things strictly professional, I had a feeling that working for him was bound to end badly. But I knew there was nowhere else in town where I could find myself a similar position. If I hadn't already put the down payment on the townhome, I might have seriously considered just going elsewhere. But as it was, and with Ronnie in tow, leaving town wasn't an option. Doing something in another line of work had never been an option for me either. That meant that somehow I had to make this work, for all our sakes. I couldn't help thinking back to college, though. We'd gotten on one another's nerves all the time, it seemed like. We had gone up against one another for pretty much every opportunity that the business school had to offer, from internships to scholarships and more. Somehow that had all culminated in that one night together, a night which I could never forget. We had been at some house party celebrating the end of finals. It was the same day I had found out I had gotten that internship in NYC. I'd had a few drinks and was dancing with a cute boy who had suggested we go somewhere private to talk. I still cringe thinking back to that night. I didn't know how I had gotten things so wrong. Had I really been naive enough to think that he really wanted to just talk? Of course that wasn't what he wanted. I pushed at the guy's chest, trying to get him off me, but his mouth was still pressed against mine, his body pushing me back against the wall of the garage. We were totally alone here, and in the dark. I could still hear the music from the party, the laughter, but it sounded strangely muted, as if we were somehow underwater. I distinctly heard the tear of my dress as the guy yanked it open to expose my black lace bra. It was almost as loud as the pounding of my heart and the alarm bells ringing inside my head. That was as far as the guy got, though. Just then, the jerk was yanked away by a firm set of hands. Wes Brown was there, scowling at the other guy.
"The fuck do you think you're doing?"
he snapped. For a second, I thought they were going to get into a fight, but as Wes stepped forward, looming over the other guy, it was obvious that it wasn't a fair match. The other guy took off. I slumped against the wall, fighting back the tears. Wes Brown. Shit. I never thought I would be glad to see him of all people. It was undeniable, though. Tonight, he had saved me. I shivered with the cold, suddenly becoming aware of the fact that my dress was ripped. I hunched over, as though trying to hide the evidence. Wes was already shrugging out of his jacket. He held it out to me. I hesitated for a moment, looking up at his face, unsure what to do. He was carefully looking away from me, where most guys might have been drinking in the sight of my breasts while they had the chance. I wordlessly accepted the jacket, the denim warm and soft in my hands. I buttoned it up all the way, covering all the evidence of what had happened. I folded my arms across my chest. Wes coughed lightly, uncomfortably, seeming like he didn't know what to say. "Can I buy you a beer?" I asked, not wanting to talk about what had just happened and what he may or may not have seen. Wes raised an eyebrow at me, glancing back toward the noise of the party. "Not in there," I quickly said. "There's a place around the corner, Mulligan's." Wes laughed.
"Sure,"
he agreed.
"Lead the way."
We walked quietly to the pub. It wasn't far, but it seemed like it took forever to get there. Neither of us seemed to be able to think of a way to break the ice. As we sat there with our beers, though, we slowly started to open up to one another. I found out that he wasn't the monster I had thought he was. In fact, looked at in the right light, he was pretty charming. One beer turned into 3, and the next thing we knew, it was last call.
"Let me walk you back home,"
he said as we spilled out onto the street. I stared at him for a long moment, uncertain. I had managed over the course of our time there to forget about what had happened at the party, but now it all came rushing back. Was Wes trying to make a move on me? Did I want Wes to make a move on me? Before he could retract his offer, I nodded. "Sure," I said, turning my feet in the direction of home. Wes followed after me. Again, we were silent on the walk, but this silence was a lot more companionable than the one earlier in the night. Back outside my door, I turned toward him, struggling to find the words to say to thank him for tonight. As I looked up at him, my breath caught. There, beneath the light of the street lamp, I had to admit he was handsome. It was something I had known for a while now, but I had buried my attraction behind our rivalry. There was no rivalry to hide behind now. The next thing I knew, we were kissing. I could feel the surprise radiating off him, but then he wrapped his arms around my waist and pulled me closer, deepening the kiss. Electricity shot through me, making me moan. My knees felt weak. Had I ever been kissed like this before? No, I definitely hadn't. He nipped playfully at my lower lip and then soothed the sting of pain with his tongue. My body tingled with pleasure, and it was all I could do to keep from ripping his clothes off right here. I pulled back. "My roommate already moved out," I informed Wes. He stared at me, and I could see the emotions warring in his eyes. I looked away bitterly. Oh, so he wasn't interested. Fine. But Wes cupped my cheek in his palm, turning my gaze back toward him.
"Are you sure?"
he asked quietly, his eyes gentle as they met mine. Coming from anyone else, I might have scowled and pushed him away. I knew he was thinking back to earlier in the evening, though. To when he had come around the corner of the garage and saved me. He just wanted to make sure I was all right. Something warm fluttered in my chest. I refused to look too closely at that, though. This was Wes Brown, and even though there was nothing left for us to compete over, it didn't mean we were suddenly friends. This was just sex, and I wanted it. I pulled him in for another kiss, this one vicious and searing, as I tried to show him just how sure I was. As our tongues battled for dominance, I couldn't help but smile against his lips. Maybe there was one more thing for us to compete over, and I wanted it, more than words could say.
Chapter 3. Wes. Rian wasn't the first girl I'd kissed, but I had to admit, kissing had never felt like this before. From the very second our lips touched, it felt as though the air was sizzling around us. She approached kissing the same way she did everything else, with a fiery passion and a laser-sharp focus. It was one of the things that had earned my grudging respect in all those years having her as a competitor in business school. This was my first taste of what it felt like to have that focus turned on me, however. It had me rock hard in no time at all. I didn't want to pressure her, though. I didn't want to do anything that would make her uncomfortable. She wasn't trying to push me away like she had that jerk earlier in the night, but I definitely didn't want to be that guy. We had had a few drinks, and Rian had never so much as looked at me in a sexual way before. And then again, she was the one who initiated the kiss.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?